Hello, I am Tracy Otsuka, your host. Welcome back to ADHD for Smartass Women. My mission, you know it, it's to show you who you are and inspire you to be it. After meeting thousands of ADHD women, I can say with confidence, every single one is brilliant at something, no exceptions. So, of course, I am just delighted to introduce you to Meral Alizada. Meral Alizada is one of those people who makes you rethink what's possible when you lead with both heart and strategy. She's the founder of Results of Kindness, ROK, where she's on a mission to help companies build workplaces where neurodivergent minds aren't just accommodated, they're celebrated. With degrees in law and psychology and a background in organizational psych, Meryl knows how to navigate systems. But what sets her apart is how she redesigns them with empathy, creativity, and a deep understanding of what actually works for ADHD and autistic brains. Diagnosed with both in her late 20s, Meryl brings lived experience to every table she sits at, and it shows. She's the brains behind the Genius Retention Program, which helps companies stop losing their most brilliant minds to burnout and bureaucracy. Her work blends neuroscience, imagination, and just the right amount of rebellion. And she's not afraid to challenge outdated ideas about leadership, success, or what inclusion really means. Born to Afghan Uzbek parents and raised across Europe, Meryl brings a global lens and a whole lot of soul to everything she does. She's not just here to talk about neurodiversity, she's here to change how we think about it. Welcome, Meryl. Did I get all of that right?
Goodness me, thank you so much, Tracy. What a wonderful, incredibly inspiring introduction. I hope that I meet the gravity of the way that you've introduced me, and what an honor it is to be here on your podcast to discuss ADHD, neurodiversity, and hopefully kindness.
Yeah, absolutely kindness. At least here in this country, we need a lot more of it. So I'm delighted to be talking to you today. So, can we talk about your ADHD diagnoses first? That's kind of where we like to start because it gives our listeners an opportunity to get to know you and kind of understand who you are and where you come from. Is that okay?
Absolutely. So my ADHD diagnosis happened. I'm 28. I turned 28 last month, and I was diagnosed at 27. So remarkably later than the typical diagnosis. And it came about, Tracy, when I worked in a nursery for a year. And that was when I transitioned from law to psychology, and I needed mental health experience. And I had some experience working with children, and I had lots of experience working as an educator, as a tutor. And I had the honor and privilege of a lifetime of working one to one with a maths genius, a child who had both autism and ADHD. And working with him and being a part of his growth and his development. So he went from someone who was non-verbal and someone who could not express themselves, who was not able to complete tasks, to sitting next to me and reading Cat in the Hat with a fluency that would put voiceover actors to shame. Aside from his incredible breakthrough, and a lot of the work that we did was intuitive, but it was also led by SEN practitioner led interventions and lesson plans and activity structures. I noticed myself in him. I noticed his tendencies matched mine, his extreme focus matched mine, his non-linear thinking and contributions very much reminded me of how I was many, many years ago in those classrooms, how he never felt at one with others, how he was this bright star and always had so much energy and so much to give and so much empathy. And so that experience of watching him and nurturing him, I felt as if my own inner child was being nurtured. And that led me to take the autism and ADHD assessment and found out that I have both. And so it was it wasn't a painful diagnosis story. I always knew that there was something different about my impression of life, my presentation of self, and as a woman of color who is neurodivergent, you know, I think we are under a lot of pressure to seem a certain way, to dress and act and be a certain way. And I never quite fit the bill. And it was seeing him, seeing this incredible genius before me, who I essentially helped raise, inspired me to return to my inner child and to diagnose and to nurture her again in my late 20s.
So, how old was this boy?
He was 3 years old and he turned four when I left. I worked with him for a year, and he was right in the middle of those very important development years. Such an honor to be a part of that, but I think it was also the years where ADHD and autism very much shows itself, especially in males, especially in boys.
Yeah. So, I'm curious, when you were around his age, were you also nonverbal? Were you slow to speak?
That's actually a really interesting question that you asked this. I started speaking when I was around 9 months old. I know that that is, if anyone hearing this, or perhaps yourself, you're surprised, people would pick me up and I would start speaking and they would put me down and they would say, they would sort of get the goosebumps because I started speaking so early. So, in terms of the non-verbal presentation, I think I was the total opposite end of the spectrum. But looking at, for example, childhood videos, I really struggled at that age to play. Like, if I had a toy put in front of me, I had no idea what to do with it. I liked things that were nimble and small, but not so much the grand things. And I didn't really know how to play. And I never quite finished tasks. And so when I was watching those childhood videos and thinking about should I have the diagnosis, I saw a lot of myself in the boy, but also a lot of unique traits that this boy did not have. And I thought, okay, there is something of similarity, but there's something of distinction I need to find out.
Are you an only child?
I am not an only child. I am the oldest of four children, the sort of the quintessential eldest daughter of immigrants and all the responsibilities and characteristics that come with it. And I think it's a good question to ask because, and maybe I'm sure that we'll get into it, but I, for much of my life, was not allowed to present or express the very natural manifestations of ADHD and autism symptoms. So much of my life has been masking because the responsibility that I was given as a child and all the way through up until now, I have not had the privilege and the safe space to be able to express those symptoms of, let's say, overstimulation or wanting things in a certain way or wanting certainty or wanting clarification. So it being the oldest daughter does complicate my presentation, my relationship with neurodiversity. But I think it also means that my activism comes from a place of real depth and desire for people to be free of that anchor that is social norms and cultural norms of how women, and especially the oldest daughters of families, should be.
Yep, absolutely. So I'm curious, were you the only girl in the family or did you have sisters?
So I have two sisters and one brother, and we all have remarkably different personalities. That's us.
And do you feel like you're very different than the other three, or are you fairly similar?
I genuinely believe, and actually, I read something a few days ago that you can have autistic traits or ADHD traits, but not be, it may not be enough to diagnose you as ADHD or autism, and it's very much genetic. And of course, coming from a culture where mental health, let alone neurodiversity, it's not considered to be something that we talk about in the open. That always complicated matters. So when I was diagnosed and I said, hey, it might run in the family, there was a little bit of pushback. But actually, and the reason I'm saying this is because we are different. But if you sort of, and I observe this quite like a very observant person, I observe this, during family dinners or when there's a loud noise, or the famous when things don't go to plan, everyone responds in a remarkably similar way. Or when we go to shopping malls, God forbid, I mean, we don't anymore, but everyone has a very similar reaction. They just handle it in different ways. So it's certainly there, and I can certainly attest that this is genetic, but people, I think family members have a different relationship to it, a different way of handling it. And that's why we think it might just be some and not the other. But in our case, I think it's everyone.
Ah, and when you look at your parents, do you see a little bit of that in both parents, or is it mostly one parent?
I love these questions, Tracy, because these were things that I was thinking about a few days ago. My father is very ADHD, but try convincing him that he is because
Is he an entrepreneur?
no, he's an engineer, so he's very sort of incredibly routine driven, but also very creative. And he's found a very good way of dealing with the ADHD, if that's the right term. And my mother has very autistic traits. And I think there might be some they might have both, but I think the predominant presentation in my mother is autism, and in my father, it's ADHD. And, like for example, standing on tiptoes, or the way that they wash the dishes, or the way that they process information, just how creative they are, and just how much they sort of shock you with how fast their minds work. I'm like, yeah, that's where I get it from. I get both from them.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what was your childhood like? Clearly, you were the oldest daughter, so you were the responsible one. I can completely relate to that. And I suspect you also were the one that was doing all the like work, right? And then trying to manage your siblings and probably got pushback from your siblings for that. But I'm basically talking about my experience. So I'm curious, like what the childhood dynamics were when you were growing up. I mean, did you ever have time to just be a kid? I'm one of four too, the oldest of four.
Oh goodness, then you know exactly the experience, and I think perhaps you'd share my response when I say there wasn't so much time to be a child, and I think that perhaps it sort of presents itself in not knowing how to play, or not knowing how to unwind, or feeling like everything has to have a purpose. And to answer your general question, it's interesting because the consistency that I provided my family and my siblings and my friends, when it came to me, I was the most inconsistent because after taking care of everyone, there was, as you can imagine, very little left in the tank for myself. So it was, this imposter syndrome, Tracy, where I was incredibly consistent with others. I never forgot if I promised someone something, or if I said that I'd do something for someone, it would get done. It would get done in the next few seconds. It would not go to the 24th hour. But when it came to myself, I was doing my homework, and then this is something that I've never actually said because people have this idea that, Meryl's like an academic weapon. I was doing a lot of my homework, hours before, or I was very much neglecting my own routines. And it was like I was consistent with others, but when it came to myself, it felt like a really difficult task to self-regulate and to not overthink some of these routines, because with others I could perhaps distance myself, and perhaps my brain worked faster and easier with them. But with myself, I was experiencing myself. I was experiencing the autism, which was this need to do everything perfectly, and ADHD, where I struggled to complete tasks that I started. And so it was this double life that I was living, where I seemed very put together, and I was called the most organized person in the year by one of my teachers. And I remember just sitting there thinking, if only she saw how much I struggle with myself, across those development years up until, puberty and post-puberty as well. And another thing is forgetfulness. So I don't know if this is ADHD or if it's autism, because the research doesn't say that there is a very clear relationship between a lack of object permanence and ADHD and autism, but maybe you can tell me. If I don't complete something now, it almost floats into the air and disappears. And if I don't do it there and then, it's as if it never existed. So that was a huge part of my, in terms of the way that I approached my work and how I completed my work. So sometimes, and that's when I came across the quote on YouTube, never touch the same things twice. And I felt like the universe delivered that quote to me to say, Meryl, finish it. Do not look at it twice. And that's why, for example, either my homework had to be done half an hour before, or it was sort of like a little masterpiece on its own because that extreme focus meant that the day that I got it was the day I completed it and the next day I handed it in. And another really interesting manifestation of the forgetfulness is that when I was away from friends, on the weekend or during summer holidays, I would sort of forget about them. Um, and you know how school is and second, high school and everyone talks and everyone's very highly critical. I was told that I was quite a cold person because I wouldn't really feel the need to reach out, or when I saw them again, it wasn't a very performative, oh my God, I've seen you after a long time. It's almost as if I forgot them if they were not in front of me. So perhaps, so it was, forgetfulness, inconsistency. And I would say one other thing is non-linear thinking, which made me very difficult to handle or to teach in the classroom because I was always coming up with very creative, almost otherworldly responses in essays. So I would have in school, they would cross out an entire page on my essays and say, this is not part of the curriculum. Therefore, it's useless. And I remember being heartbroken by that and getting lower marks because other people essentially regurgitated content. Well, I was in my own lane of thought leadership and really crippled by that. And I don't think my relationship with, academic motivation perhaps recovered after that because I saw there's no space for me. There's no space for this non-linear thinking that actually transformed human history otherwise, but I was not allowed to access it. So that was my ADHD childhood.
So, a couple things. You talked about your relationship with your siblings, and I'm curious because you were so focused on what needs to get done and, what needs to organize, and I'm sure how to make sure that your parents are happy. Did your siblings think of you, and this is a very sexist term, but this is what they call little girls that, are bosses, bossy? Or were you really sweet and gentle and kind, and did they all look up to you?
I think that as a kindness thought leader, but I don't know how this is going to sit with audiences, but I think that when you are, I was also, I had a very difficult time at school because ADHD, autistic, didn't know. I was also one student of color of three in the entire year of about, I think, 2,000, 3,000 children. And England in the early 2000s was not a very pleasant place to be for people of color. Perhaps you could say it's, not much has changed. I would say it has, but certainly not back then. So I was always sort of out of step with comfort. I was always perhaps overstimulated, and there was a lot of responsibility and pressure on me. And I do feel like in order to get the job done, I was probably a little bit more dictatorial than I wanted to be. And that wasn't because of my nature, but I think it was because the pressure and the expectations were so great that I absolutely probably was considered to be quite bossy and the first person to come to when there was an emergency, but perhaps not the person that you would think of to have fun with because Meryl was the problem solver, but she had no capacity to unwind and be that fun sister. So I discovered fun, and this is, I wouldn't say sad, but it's definitely a place of reflection for me and perhaps for those who are listening. I discovered fun when I worked at the nursery and I was required to make activities fun. Before that, I could not access it because I felt very much like I had this responsibility above all, duty above all. And how can you, when you parentify a child so early on, how are they going to find space to be charismatic and charming and fun and also get the job done of parents who were also navigating living in England for the first time and were not familiar with these systems and processes and missing home, perhaps?
One of the things I was thinking about, though, it sounds like in school you were extremely organized, which doesn't sound like a typical ADHD brain. However, I would always beg to differ on that because what I have discovered is half the population with ADHD is completely disorganized, and the other half is almost ultra organized. And we can argue that, autism and ADHD kind of run hand in hand. And I really believe they're all part of the same spectrum. Um, but I'm wondering if you think that part of your organization is because of anxiety. And so when you can't 100% rely on your brain, you can only rely on the systems around you. And so we can become hyper organized to the point of people are looking at us going, "You're crazy."
I love that, and that's such a fantastic observation because it is the truth. And I think behind every, I think as a child, I was told you're so mature, and only not I knew that that was a requirement. That was not because of something that I had desired to or that I felt an urge or a natural instinct towards. And I think you put it beautifully, Tracy, because absolutely it is anxiety. And one of the workarounds of ADHD that I have is that when it comes to admin, which is my admin, social media, and self-organization, I know that if I do not do it within 24 hours, I will probably end up doing it in 6 months' time. And that is how, that is my relationship with time. And it's a fear that you almost cannot quite trust yourself to follow through on small tasks. You may be able to get big tasks done. There's a sort of a running joke in the family that Meryl was doing A-level maths or college level maths at the age of 13, but she struggled to tie her shoelaces until she was 16. So that it just goes to show that there's certain things that I will never gel with, and that's why the anxiety means that I have to sort of put almost dictatorial safeguards in place so that those things that do not come naturally to me still get done. Because as a business owner, the amount of admin that I have to confront every day is heinous and I have to get it done. Otherwise, the business does not move forward. So, yes, it's anxiety. It's not a natural instinct, it's a fear of what could happen if you do not clamp down on yourself. So these are real struggles.
Well, it's calming to your nervous system to feel like everything is in its place, right? And so we build these systems and structures. And I often say, I believe that the women that struggle the least with ADHD are also the ones that are might be on the autism spectrum because at least you have the organization fighting the chaos, so you're constantly, but you've got the creativity but also the structures to be able to build the business or write the book or do the thing. However, even without autism, I really believe that those structures can be learned because if we're living in total chaos, like our brain's already chaos, right? So if the external is also chaotic, oh my God, we don't have any chance. But those systems can be taught because they're actually calming to the nervous system. And so when you learn one system and you gain confidence around, okay, I could do that, then you want to do another one so that your nervous system isn't always heightened. You've talked about friendships and family, and nothing I have heard you say indicates to me that you don't understand social rules. Is that true?
That's a really, again, a fantastic question. I think that I'll give you a little bit of a background to why I seem very aware of social rules and roles, because Afghan society and Uzbek society, although it's Uzbek society is slightly more modernized in this perspective, in this way. There is a very clear role that people play in society. We are told from a very, very young age, a girl, and the terrible thing is we say good girl. A good girl does this. A good boy does this. A marriage worthy woman, and this is someone who 5 or 6 years old listening to this, a marriage worthy woman does this, and a marriage worthy or respect worthy man does this. So we are told again and again and again what a woman should be, what they should look like, how they should dress, and we very much police, or at least I would say perhaps my community or the community I grew up in, we police each other to the T as to how we should be. So for me, as an autistic individual and someone with ADHD, social rules that have no utility enrage me. They are the black holes of productivity, the black holes of efficiency, and the black holes of happiness. But Tracy, when you are told this is how a woman should dress, this is how a girl should be, this is how a good girl should be, you have no choice but to have that knowledge source back at the back of your head. I never adhered to it. I was always rebellious, but it was always there. Therefore, I would say if it wasn't for that, I would be very clueless about social roles and social cues and social rules, but it's because of the way that it was installed into us. So we would almost have sort of meetings before going somewhere. Meryl, you have to do this. You're okay, you're the second youngest, you have to do this. Okay, my mum is going to do this, my dad's going to do this. This is how we're going to do it. These are the questions that we can't answer. This is the posture that we're going to take. So it was to that level of, we call sort of like front facing behavior. And for me, Tracy, it was interesting. No one else protested and was so enraged and suffocated by it as much as I was, and as much as my siblings are. That's probably why they tend not to attend a lot of these gatherings, and they'd rather be away from that. But I was looking at it thinking, why are we being asked to be good girls? What are we saying about women who don't adhere to that? There's a human rights problem there. What if someone is different presenting? How are we going to treat them? Why are we doing this when actually we could be having such a great time learning about other people, enjoying ourselves, but we're here playing a caricature? So that's where it comes from. It's not because of a natural understanding, but something that was very much grilled into me from a very young age, as young as maybe 3 or 4.
And I will tell you that I know, what we experience as far as all the social conditioning here in the United States is not at the level that you're talking about, but it's all here under the current. And, we still gender kids from the time they're born. The girls go in pink, the boys go in blue. There's certain appropriate, play things for girls and for boys. And a lot of it is, culturally related to where you grow up, but trust me, it's still there. And it's something many of us, are fighting every single day, not just with how we've raised children, but how we move in the world. So I am curious, what has changed for you since you were diagnosed? We've spent a lot of time on this, but you're so clear and eloquent in how you talk about what you've experienced that I think it's really helpful.
To answer your question, when I got the diagnosis, firstly, I cried because it made me realize why I was excluded from the rooms that should have been mine, why I spent a lot of my childhood and my later years, and perhaps even now, lonelier than the common person, why I did not have the typical High School Musical youth where, everyone is having the time of their lives and I'm being invited to all these parties. It was none of that. It was a very self-enclosed, isolated life. And I had to weep for all the times that I broke my edges and broke myself to fit into these rooms that still would not have me, people that would still not have me. And then the self kindness came. So one thing that, and because I'm very vocal about and very open about neurodiversity, I have had, especially women of color, come to me and say, you know, it's so great that we're Gen Z, that now it's okay to talk about it, it's okay to seek diagnosis. What advice would you give? And I would say, know this, that if you were determined in this plane, in this material plane, to be neurodivergent, that means that you have something to give that no one else in the world can emulate and replicate. And at a time where loneliness is high, mental health is high, global disengagement in the workplace, anxiety of AI automation, replacement of human beings with AI bots, mass loneliness, I could talk on and on about all these crises. You are here at the right time, in the right place, with the right amount of difference. And I would say, accept that your life, radically accept if you can, or go towards that end. And that's what I have done. That's how the diagnosis has changed and shaped me. I know for certain, Tracy, that I will not be, do, act, want, and have the life that other people have. And so I'm remarkably switched off of social media, whereas this was the same girl who would look at the world and say, why not me? Or why are milestones not happening for me? Why am I slower or faster or not moving at all in the direction of my peers? And so for me, it has been the source of my self kindness, self compassion, and at some point, radical self acceptance that my life is not going to be that of others. And I know it probably sounds a little bit cliche, but for the environment that I have grown up in and the way that women are required to meet certain checkpoints in a very structured, very narrow way, for me, this is one of the things that I'm greatly proud of all the things that I have done or I'm yet to do. I think this is the thing that has been revolutionary for my soul, and that's what the diagnosis gave me: self, belonging to myself, and taking my life by my own hands. It's no longer someone else's. It's no longer trying to be something else or someone else.
So when you say you're never going to be, have, do what other people are doing, um, when I think of that, I'm like, well, I don't want to do what they're doing. I don't want to be who they're being. I mean, you feel the same way, right? It's like they're them. Sorry, kind of boring.
Yes, yes. But I mean, if you think about it, Tracy, if you think of put yourself in, if I put myself in the shoes of a 16-year-old, goodness me, that's hard to do. Goodness me, that's hard to do. When, let's say, late 20s, everyone's getting engaged, everyone's getting married, and you've got a neurodivergent person who struggles with friendships, let alone a life partner, that's still very painful. So I think that it takes time, but I think that journey of becoming and saying, I don't even want to have your life, comes from a place of great wisdom, which is amazing that's the plane that you've arrived at. And I don't know if it's okay to ask, but did that happen very recently, or was that a realization that you had a while ago? Because it's very inspiring, especially for Gen Z who are listening. As a Gen Z person myself, I'd love to know.
You know, when you were talking just now, I was thinking, I can't believe I'm telling this story, but I was thinking of this experience. I was in high school. I was probably 16 years old, and I had a friend group. And I don't know what happened with the friend. I had two friend groups. I don't know what happened with that one friend group, but they were more popular than the other friend group. And something happened, and I was mad at one of the girls. And I still remember I was in the cafeteria. They were sitting in the cafeteria, and I walked up to them and I said to this friend in front of all the other, girls that were sitting there, don't ever give yourself permission to talk to me again. And I turned on my heels and I walked out. And I think about that now and I'm like, what the hell? Like, what I, but honestly, I get what you're saying in terms of I've never been the kind of woman who has a girl pack. I just get so bored, you know. I tell in my book this story of I had these group of women friends, and we live close to Napa Valley, and it's the wine country, and so they would once a year go to these wineries. Well, first of all, they'd go to a hotel. It was always this fancy hotel, and we'd go to the wineries and the spas during the day, and then we'd go eat out at night. And I never made it to the spa. I always said I would. I always tried. I would just fly in at the ninth hour. Usually it was 5:30, right before dinner hour. And there was, I was working, so there was always some excuse. But I realize now that I just couldn't do that. I just couldn't sit at a spa. I was bored out of my gourd. And these were really nice women. And sometimes the conversation was great, but it was, we tend to we want to talk about things that are intense and really interesting to us. And to sit there and make niceties for hours at a time, it just was never my thing. And so I think in answer to your question, when I was younger, I knew that, but I didn't really know it. And so I would say these flip things, and I'm not even sure. I probably was hurt about what happened there, but I would just mask it under this bravado, like, "Pfft, you're not worth my time." Versus now, as I'm older, because of ADHD, there's an explanation why I couldn't just be one of the girls or one of the women, right? And that is super helpful because it's less about what's wrong with it. Like, why can't I do this? And it's more about, oh, this is why. It's just, and then I think we make better choices. So my choice will never be, again, to say yes to that kind of event. It doesn't mean I don't like going away and doing things with other people, but I tend to like to do it in couples with my husband. And I think it's because then I get away time. Because like he's so, we're so used to each other that I can do away time with him, but it's harder for me to do it with big groups of people. And it's interesting because I also was the kind of person who, like, I loved cocktail parties. I loved big events. You show up and you find someone and you find something interesting about them and you talk to them for hours. Versus as I've gotten older, if I can find that person, great, but I have a lot less of a boredom threshold. And so I don't know how I feel about those kinds of big events anymore, rather than what I do enjoy is going out like to dinner or to lunch with one person, because then it's kind of all about them or it's all about me, right? It's not like dividing time and then worrying about, okay, did I speak too much or how someone reacts to something I might say. There's only one person you have to focus on. And I think that's kind of the intensity with which we live. We really want to get in there and, hook the person and really understand who are they, what's important to them, and have conversations that matter. So I went on a really long time, but that is how I would respond to your question.
I cannot tell you how affirming it is, because this is such a, and I wouldn't say that we're all the same, we all have the same personalities, but I cannot tell you just how brilliantly and eloquently you put that. And I was nodding along in my head to everything, and I completely agree. And I think that again, it reminds me of the story of, Leonardo da Vinci. If Leonardo da Vinci spent, and he was ADHD, and if he spent all his time exchanging niceties and staying in the same place and the same vibration of energy, would he have been Leonardo da Vinci? And I think that when you are comfortable with staying in a place of normalcy, or what is comfortable, or what is perhaps surface level interaction, there's nothing to learn. And I think there's something about being neurodivergent. There is this, we're very purpose driven, we're very passion driven, we're very utility driven. What is going to be the gain from this? Not in a materialistic way, but where is the depth in this? Where is the substance? And absolutely, and that's probably why I also didn't have the High School Musical life where I was sort of part of a Mean Girls clique, because it never made sense to me. A lot of these rituals do not have that substance. And I think we're always seeking that. And what we call, I think what the world calls intensity, I would say it's emotional aliveness. we're alive enough to see that we want soul and depth and meat and life-changing encounters, and then we can go back into ourselves and grow from that rather than being at this plateau of what is comfortable all the time. So I love that, and it was a pleasure to ask you the question as a question that I was really keen to ask, because that is inspirational and aspirational for many young women and men who are neurodivergent or who still haven't come to terms with the fact that, you know, they're not going to be that way, and they can also accept and embrace that that's just never going to fill their cup to begin with.
You made me think too that this whole thing, this whole idea of friendship, and I am old enough to be your mother. So we're coming at it from different angles. But I really believe that friends come in and out of your life for a season. Maybe you're lucky enough and you have a friend that, and I do, a couple that I've, have been lifelong friends. But I also observe, because I'm older, relationships that other friends have where, because that was a childhood friend, even though you no longer have anything in common and you actually annoy each other, there's still this sense that I have to remain in that friendship. And I don't know if this is good or bad, but I just don't feel that way. I really feel like, if we're not growing together, I need to find someone who is. So I'm very particular of who I kind of let in my orbit, because I don't think it's fair to them. And I can't play the game that a lot of women can, because I can't remember anything. So I am not going to be the one who, is great about remembering birthdays and buying gifts and, all of that, writing. Well, I used to be really good at writing thank you notes because, again, like you, it was this is what is expected of a good mother, of a good wife, of a good woman, right? You write thank you notes. And the more I thought about it, it's like, I was there when I opened it with her or him, and I said thank you. I loved it, whatever. Why do I now have to write a thank you note after the fact, which is so stressful because I have to remember all the things in order to get, the thank you note together, write it, get it in the mail. I've actually got one that it was more of a sympathy card that is literally in the car in a well. And I just remembered that's different. I write sympathy cards. But the thank you card thing, and why is it only women that write thank you cards? Why are we the only ones that are supposed to be thankful? So, but anyway, I just really believe that I don't feel this need to hang on to friendships. They were in my life for a reason. I'm so happy they were in my life, but we've grown, and we want different things and we are different people. And I just kind of observe people who friends who feel, who have to stay in these friendships. They need to feel like they have 1,000 friends, and I don't feel that at all. I want a few really, really good friends, especially at this stage in my life. So I'm curious with you, how do you feel about that?
This is such a memorable, wonderful conversation, because I cannot tell you how seen and how understood I feel by your perspective. And I think that, again, I think you touched on something that's really important, is that neurodiverse people, we are not rude, we are sincere. Now, we don't feel the need to, but for me, the ultimate kindness is the one that can perhaps requires you to break someone's heart, because it's important that there be truth and sincerity rather than holding true to customs or to relationships that no longer work. For me, what I found, and I completely agree with you, it's happened. I would say the universe, I believe in God. So I would say that God magnetizes me towards people. And then when the soul mission is done, there's a separation. So I don't think that it's me having decided I'm still learning about self advocacy and taking the reins of your life. And I think that you really start to do that in your mid 20s, or if you're very lucky and very emotionally intelligent and very street smart, in your early 20s. But for me, I'm still learning, and I always felt grief, Tracy, as to why my friendships were so short-lived. And it was because, I very much believe in the intelligence of the soul, and that everyone has a soul makeup and they have a soul mission, and that determines the length and the quality of their relationships. So for me, I feel as if I've had to encounter lots of people, come into touch with lots of people, but for a very short, limited, purposeful time. And the moment that I have grown, I found that they leave my life themselves. So it hasn't been a conscious choice, but it's because I think that, and it just, again, the thing of, and not to bring it into business, intentionally, but it strikes me as common sense that we should be putting neurodivergent perspectives, feedback, and insight at the center of organizations, because it is the most sustainable, transformative route for exponential growth, creativity, innovation, holding off, the AI anxiety, or the automation anxiety, because we are so growth led. We don't stay where things have rotted. We don't stay where things are ill placed. There is a real fidelity, I would say, to genuine and being sincere and being honest, that we will just not no longer even sit comfortably with people that we have grown far from, or that we no longer magnetize with. And I wonder just how, I would say it is a lonely path, because a lot of the time you meet people, for me at least, and then you spend time with them, maybe 5 or 6 months, a year, 2 years if I'm lucky, and then it's as if they start to sort of say goodbye, sort of subconsciously from me. And I really grieved that, but I also realized how lucky I am that that is happening, because I'm gaining wealth of understanding and realization and inner growth, because I'm touching on these bedrocks of growth in these individuals, but I'm sort of moving away from them when the time is through. And yes, it is lonely, but my goodness, how much of growth and self-expansion can we experience when we embrace that, rather than staying in places that feel comfortable and familiar, that do not extend our souls. And I would also say, Tracy, that do not undermine the courage that it takes to have the position or to have the approach that you have. I've been lucky because the universe, has pulled me away from people who no longer are good for my growth, or they have completed their place in my life. But just how courageous it is to live a life of sincerity rather than social comfort. And this is why we can learn so much from neurodiverse individuals, that neurodiversity is the path for growth. It's the ultimate source and example of what it means to be sincere, and to be so dedicated to self-development. Because how many people get the invitation, the spiritual invitation to grow? Most of them stay where they are. How amazing it is to say, you know what, I'm going to learn, I'm going to grow. And even if it means losing the comfort of your company, I'm okay. That is a hugely undermined superpower.
That was one of the best things that I've ever heard someone say about ADHD. And I mix up ADHD and autism because, again, I think they're all part of the same spectrum. But what you said is that our single most goal, and I think I can say this, most people with ADHD, I do think that is our single most goal, is self development. We're constantly trying to better ourselves. And that is exactly the key. It's hard for me to be around people, even old friends, that is not their goal too. So they're staying stagnant. I'm trying to make myself better what the hell do we talk about? The weather? I never actually put those two together. Obviously, I know self development is a huge thing for me, but to really think about ADHD and the thousands of women that I've met, we all seem to have that same goal. It's we want to make ourselves better. We want to make the world better. We want to, I don't know, whatever we're interested in, we want to make it better. We embrace change. The other thing is I think when you're talking about friendships too, for me the key is I have to feel positive emotion. I have to feel better when I leave than when I came. And if I don't, if I feel like there's this weird undercurrent or there's because people who aren't interested in change, who don't want to make themselves better, who don't want to make society better, they are not comfortable with us because we challenge their comfort, right? So I really think that ultimately that is the key. And we you're highly intuitive. And so we can sense that. We can feel that. And that feeling is walking away and feeling worse than when we showed up.
I just got goosebumps because I always think about, well, who are the true leaders of this world? And on the Results of Kindness website, it says that it's the outsiders. It's those, I mean, if you think about it, you just described the ultimate leader. And I got just goosebumps just saying that again. Because if we have self reflective, determined, intuitive, honest people of integrity and power, just imagine for a moment what that would do. And for me, this is why I said this in another episode, a podcast appearance, I am relentless with my self development because I have seen that the first thing that in Afghanistan, for example, the first thing that war does is it corrupts the ability to self reflect. And that is why we have issues of substance abuse, domestic violence, leadership ineffectiveness, fraud. The fact that the country is the way that it is now because the spirit of people has been taken, their ability to introspect has been taken. Mental health has become this shadowy, worrisome, weird concept. And I have seen, and I have had a friend very recently, she was remarkably in love with this man who had gone through something very difficult, and they were from my community. And he had gone through two family tragedies. And I genuinely believe that this girl came as a mirror to hold up to him, to inspire him to change and to grow. And the difference was between living in that grief, and which is understandable, which, I say, God forbid anything like that happens to anyone across the world, because what happened to him was specifically very, very difficult and terrible. But because she was also relentless like me in her mental health, in her self reflection, in her self development, in her soul growth and self expansion, that she was probably the most sincere opportunity for him to turn his life around. And when he said no, she came to me and she said, Meryl, we are doing spiritual warriorship. This is the path of the ultimate courage. And the Sufis say it's the spiritual wing of Islam. This world is designed to upgrade your soul. And everything that happens, and the law of attraction people will say the same thing, is yourself reflected upon you. That is your soul mission. The Sufis say this is the entire purpose of existence. And imagine you were doing this, Tracy, at 16. I was doing this at around the same age. This is a sacred path of courage. And we should only be putting people in position of power who are willing to look upon themselves every day and are indomitable and are unstoppable in improving themselves. And that's not a materialistic thing. It's not a Western philosophy kind of yogic thing that without substance. It's the entire purpose of your life. Self-development means that you will then become an asset to humanity. And the moment that you sit stale, you are rotting your own soul and also denying the world of your light. And this is something that we as neurodiverse people are doing every day. every time we choose sincerity, every time we choose self-growth, every time we choose, and this is a big one, loneliness over the company of the stale.
Great segue for your company. Why did you call it Results of Kindness, and what exactly do you do?
So, results of kindness is, and I also had a very interesting eureka moment that I am not a coach, I'm not a consultant, and that is why Results of Kindness is officially a thought leadership, systems design and development, and education firm. And our mission is to make kindness the corporate and government and individual standard, not just the exception, the luxury, or a nice to have thing. And I called it Results of Kindness because in my life, the sustainable successes, the real worthwhile successes that have been bulletproof and future proof and situation proof have come about because of this unwavering commitment to humanity, to emotional intelligence, to integrity, to honesty. And when I changed my profession from law to psychology, I went through this very sort of the dark night of the soul, which for those who are unfamiliar, it happens in different situations. But for me, I was thinking, okay, my parents, I'm the oldest daughter, and I had a great career in law. I'm going into psychology, but I don't know if I'm going to be, again, being neurodiverse, can I use psychology, but I don't think I'm going to be a practitioner. So God did the most, as he always does. And I went to a networking event and I met a serial entrepreneur, and he said, "Send me your things." He said, "You do know you've been campaigning for kindness your entire life. Have you considered entrepreneurship?" I said, and I just remembered all the times I was struggling just to write emails. I said, no. I thought, no, I'm not street smart enough. I'm not nimble. Maybe there isn't a place for me. And then I started researching and I saw that the most profitable, productive, sustainable, long term strategy in business can only be can only emanate from organizational kindness. And for me, it's systemic kindness. It's kindness as infrastructure, not just the way that, for example, a leader leads a meeting or the way that a manager speaks to an employee, but written into the infrastructure, into the walls, into the processes, into the systems of an organization. And when I was conceiving of the logo, I had come across the concept of daisugi, which is the ancient Japanese sustainable forestry method, where mother trees are planted and from which child trees are planted, and the child tree is sustained by the mother tree. And so when I did my research and I connected the dots as to how I could have experienced the miracles and the quiet successes, the breakthroughs, and the protection of the universe and the guidance of the universe through kindness, I saw that the most sustainable business results emanates from an unwavering foundational commitment to sincere, not performative kindness. And that is why I call it results of kindness, because results can only be sustained by kindness. And the daisugi concept falls into that. And so we provide masterclasses and training and also systems implementation from programs such as Inner Leadership, where, as you brilliantly put it, I couldn't have said it better, we inspire leaders to introspect. We inspire leaders to look upon themselves and their emotional blockages and their prejudices from within that are tainting their leadership effectiveness and their ability to retain an ever diversifying, ever diverse world, all the way to our specialism, Tracy, which is genius retention. How do we retain? And how do we invite people from housewives to people who've experienced trauma to highly intelligent individuals who have a very different way of working, have a very different relationship to productivity, And how can we remove these baseless status quo practices by being inspired by the non-linear productivity, the creativity, the integrity, the team player attitude of genius employees, from neurodiverse to ethnic diversity to housewives, who I believe have the most incredible leadership and people management strategies that the business world has yet to understand and to embrace. And it all comes down to an outsider who has been an outsider for much of her life and has seen what one kind person can do, what one sincere person can do, and believes that this is the rehabilitative a global strategy that will bring us into a world that is not so hard to wake up to. So that is our okay and what we do and our intention.
When you open your website, just so our audience knows, in big, because I'm sure you do, in big bold letters are the words, "Is kindness profitable?" 89% of workers want kindness in the workplace. 52% of workers are burned out. 77% of employees are disengaged globally. This is where our organization, Results of Kindness, comes in. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of, but part of this again is sexism, right? There's this sense that in order to be a great CEO, a good boss, you can't be kind. Can you expand on that? That kindness can actually be profitable. I mean, if nothing else, retention, right? What you were saying before.
How I would answer this is profitability is about sustainability. So if we think of it in that way, that is probably the best way that I can begin this little dialogue. When you have an emotional intelligent leadership, you can make better decisions. You can choose to keep or to let go the right people. You can future forecast because you understand the nuances of what customers need, what your team requires, and you have a better understanding of where your organization is going in the future. That immediately places you at an advantage to what I call leaders who are blind to the human condition. Let's say you have a manager who is trained in emotional intelligence, in psychological safety, and in leveraging team strengths rather than micromanagement. You are 67% more likely to retain your top performers than if you are not. How many people have left? Think about how unprofitable this is for your top performers to realize, and I come from the world of, the legal world. I've seen the most incredible lawyers leave because the people who manage them or the environment that they're in is so toxic that they throw away, if you can call that, years of legal expertise and investment into their legal career and their education and start their own business. How profitable is it for people to be leaving all the time? How profitable is it that you, as a leader, you are great at thinking about more ways of, cutting your losses and cutting costs, but you're not even able to understand what the customer base, the growing customer base, requires because you have perhaps maneuvered your way out of your human lens and into an artificial lens that cannot even read or sense the market that you're in. And I think that one of the greatest determiners of profitability is your retention, as you said, is engagement. If employees feel as if they could do 99% of things right, but if that 1% is going to be the reason that they're going to be pulled in and they're going to be undermined, or their competence is going to be questioned, or there is such lack of trust and autonomy and flexibility that they feel they cannot even think, let alone function, how profitable is that for you? Because I have found that most people want to contribute. Most people are not slackers. They're not people who want to, come in and get the money and leave. Everyone comes in with hope. Everyone comes in that this place is not going to be financial stability for me, but it's going to be a place that I look forward to. And how many people are cut at the knees for being different, for not following office click behavior, for not following the pretense of productivity? And it's mostly those who contribute the most to organizations. So they are, for example, neurodiverse individuals who come in with ideas, with contribution, with willingness, who do not perform competence. And yet they're cut at the knees by managers who feel threatened by their genius, threatened by their new ways of doing things. They have, fellow employees, fellow colleagues who feel undermined or threatened by them, and create an environment where they feel they cannot perform tasks without having to constantly defend themselves. The biggest organizational pitfall of engagement, of disengagement, that causes disengagement, is office politics, toxic management, and clique behaviors. So if you want to be a leader that can future forecast, that knows the best, understands the best intentions and interests of their company, if you want to be a manager that retains their best performers, invest in your humanity. That's the other name for kindness. This creates the space for creativity to bloom, for innovation to bloom, for engagement to rise, for self-esteem to grow. Because when you treat people well, the first place they think of is gifting it back to the person that facilitated it to begin with. And I think someone said to me, if the basic things don't change, nothing changes. And yes, we have very well thought out, very well integrated systems. But what we're saying at the heart of it is, if you treat people as human beings, you are strengthening the hands with which they come and they contribute to your organization and maintain your profit margins. So that's really as simple. Perhaps I wouldn't say it's common sense, but that's where we talk about profitability. It's about sustainability. It's about keeping your best people. It's about not having processes that cut self-esteem and cut engagement at the knees so that you can thrive. And for some reason, we think that the best way to keep, to sustain profit is by peacocking and rewarding favoritism and rewarding toxic behavior and rewarding unfair power dynamics, and wondering why the best of our people are leaving and why Gen Z, who are going to be the dominant workforce by 2040, are saying, I don't want any of this. I'm going to go and be an influencer. I'm going to go and be a small business owner. I'm going to make £10,000 a year. I don't care. I am not adhering to this. So the reason it worked before, and people said, actually, a lack of kindness is profitable, because workers felt like they did not have the choice. Workers felt like this was their only opportunity. There was nothing else there. Gen Z are saying no, and look at how much a company loses when they lose a well-trained, seasoned employee. They lose up to about £50,000 per head per year. Why are we not listening?
I would also think that there's a big relationship between kindness and innovation, because what we know about the ADHD brain, right, is if we don't feel safe, we're not going to be able to be creative. Like, you cannot be stressed and also be creative. It's impossible.
Absolutely. And I think, and again, I always say, Tracy, that organizations are just a reflection of society. How many brilliant outsiders have come into this world? I watched the Alan Turing film recently, and the way that they treated him, the man that put a stop to World War II, we've been doing this for centuries. We've been cutting at the knees the very things that are the most sustainable, the most beneficial for us. And organizations are just reflecting what human society has been doing for eons. We don't know what is good for us, or even if we do, we fight it. We find other ways around it. We think, no, we're going to use the survival mechanism. But absolutely, you cannot, and especially for neurodiverse people, especially for myself, the reason that I left the 9 to 5 is because I realized it's not for me. Because if I have to fight office politics, if I have to defend myself, if I have to defend sexism, if I have to defend, all of these things, where is the time to think? And we need to be thinking as much as we can in light of the fact that we are asking a very important question now is, can we square up to the efficiency and the utility of AI? And I say that the only way that we can is becoming more human, leveraging and creating space for creativity, emotional intelligence, relational development. How are we going to do that if the air is so toxic we can't even breathe, let alone work, let alone contribute?
So, what do you think um, a workplace would look like if it was actually designed with neurodivergent brains in mind?
I tend to always give a very ideal answer, but I would say we have to work with the reality of it. Number one, it would be an environment, it would be an organization that would be truly clued on in terms of what neurodiversity is and what it isn't. And that requires a real commitment to replenishing and renewing the knowledge box. Number two, it would be a leader that is trained in emotional intelligence and inclusion and has gone through the inner work that prevents them from seeing neurodiverse individuals as equal rather than as an organizational burden. Number three, it would be the managers. A lot of the time, CEOs, C suites do not have time, they don't have the capacity to have those one to one interactions with employees, especially junior ones. So, managers would have to be trained in emotional intelligence, in bias awareness, and in self reflection so that they do not undermine the people that walk through them. Number three, number four, something that I'm very, very big on is trust-based leadership and practices and systems and how that looks like. In one example, it would be flexible work patterns that reward outcomes and results rather than processes. And I think that that would be enough for leaders, for organizational members listening to contemplate, because these are structural and foundational prescriptions that I'm giving. I think a lot of the time, and I go to a lot of these webinars, we talk about how, we need to have policies on the fridge. We need to have, a value system of inclusion. Absolutely. But if we do not have these structural, strategic, self-reflection, almost moral development within the right personnel, core personnel, and we don't have these structures and processes in place that facilitate difference, all of these surface level initiatives are not going to work. So, how that would look like beyond the structural, it would be where managers and leaders work with individuals, not to them. So, it would be coaching led management, it would be mentoring led management, and it would be in an environment that would be designed to facilitate creativity and growth. And that could look like, for example, sensory rooms, that could look like frequent feedback, that could look like strong policies against micromanagement, against office politics, and performance reviews, for example, that are based on outcomes rather than rewarding presenteeism, rather than rewarding the illusion of work. And see, and with those ideas, I think that's more than enough to think about and consider creating an environment. And that's what we're here for. We are organizational architects, and we want to create foundational change, not an initiative that is flowery and interesting, but then everyone forgets about it in 3 weeks' time.
What's something that you wish every neurodivergent employee knew about their own potential at work?
I would say to them that you are organizational assets. However, and this is a big however, for the way that the world is at the moment, for the way that workplaces are, we are still we've still got a long, long way to go. So your potential and your ability to not only survive, but to thrive in the environments that have a way to go in terms of developing themselves towards deeper inclusion is your ability to self-advocate. And that is where your focus, and that is where you have this, already you have the strength, because we are rebellious. We are people who think outside the box. And I think that if we can use our voices to advocate for change, advocate for ourselves, and not be shy in teaching or guiding organizations towards the right adjustments for us, I think that that would be something that would transform the relationship that we have with our company, which is that of, well, how much can they, step forward and how much can I step forward? Don't be shy in leveraging your organizational, that the fact that you are an organizational asset through your creativity, through your humanity, through your honesty. You are a source of feedback and growth to the organizations that will listen. But the way that you do that is by investing in your self advocacy, being an advocate for yourself, increasing in your self knowledge, and being a leader, a guide for your organization, and hoping that it's an organization that follows because it's in their best interests to do so.
Do you have, Meryl, a number one ADHD workaround?
I do, and I think we touched upon it, but I will certainly say it again. As I said, if I don't do it within a short amount of time, it disappears up into the air. So I have given myself a 24-hour rule when it comes to, for example, sending calendar invites, sending an email, responding to someone, anything that comes up out of a meeting. I have to do in 24 hours. And I will say that I'm exhausted because of it. But if I don't do it, nothing moves. So that's my 24-hour rule. And it's similar to a TikTok I saw recently. And it broke my heart, but it's necessary. It was a lady in her, maybe in sort of her late 60s. She would put her hat, so let's say she had to do something downstairs. She would put her hand up, she'd put her arm up, and she would not put it down until she got that job done. And I know it's hard, but I actually did that and I had a very productive day indeed. Because your body is saying, no, no, until you get it done. Yeah, but that's the reality of the struggle. I think perhaps the ADHD, her ADHD was severe. But it was a very interesting experiment. I mean, Tracy, maybe that's something that if you'd like to try it and let me know how it works. But it was a very drastic measure, but it does work.
Well, it's about awareness, right? I mean, your hand is up, so you are aware that you've got to do that thing, or your hand isn't going down, so it makes you want to do the thing. But I don't think you could do that with emails.
Oh no, no, no. This was but the good context. Thank you for saying that. It was like like stuff that you do at home, like household chores, which I think with for someone with ADHD, for me that's something I definitely struggle with, forgetting about something that should be done. So the moment she put her hand up, she then she could take the pillow downstairs, she could do her laundry, and then when she had done it,
Oh my God. Okay. That's an interesting one, Meryl. So, are you working on something you want to tell us about? Where can people find you if they want to know more about you and what you do? And we're going to put all of this in the show notes.
Thank you so much. So, as I said before, we are a systems development, keynotes, masterclasses, and training firm, and we are available on We are, yes, we are available on all social media platforms. The handle is Results of Kindness and Meral Alizada. So, growing the personal brand alongside the organizations. And if you'd like to hear more about our services of kindness interventions, systems, strategies, and training, then do email us. That's probably the best way to get in touch. contact@resultsofkindness.com. And of course, our portfolio of work is on our website and also on social media channels from Instagram all the way to X and Threads, of course.
Meryl, thank you so much for spending so much time with us here today. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you so much, Tracy. It's been such a memorable conversation, and I'm just so grateful that you've been with me to have this conversation. And I'm so looking forward to the work that we can potentially do together. And I can't wait to. Sorry, I'll probably have to do that again. I'll just do it again. Let's say thank you so much, Tracy, for having me. It's been one of the most memorable, affirming, perhaps life transforming conversations that I've had. And I consider you such an inspiration and a light for shining the truth and the brilliance of neurodiversity at a time where we need to be reminded of it and that we need to pioneer it the most. So thank you. It's been an honor.
Thank you, Meryl. So that's what I have for you for this week. If you like this episode with Meryl, please let us know by leaving a review. Our goal is to change the conversation around ADHD, helping as many women as we possibly can learn how their ADHD brains work so that they too may discover their amazing strengths. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you here next week.